The US is destroying young people's futures. The way things are going, young people have no chance to ever build wealth, buy a house, or ever pay off their student loans. The good news is, no matter what age bracket you are, whether you are a young person or you're a millennial with younger kids, or you're in the older Gen X or baby boomer generation with kids that are either in college or perhaps you have grandkids, there are solutions to these problems. So let's talk about what is happening in America right now, the state of our youth, and then let's talk about some of the solutions and how we can help fix this, not only as a nation, but for our children as well. We really need to start this conversation by explaining just where our youth are at. As an older generation, we sometimes don't understand or have a good appreciation for just how difficult the youth in America have it right now. For most of the history of the United States, when we were in our young 20s and 30s, we had a really good chance to build wealth and to move up in society. We had a good chance by going to college and getting a job, maybe paying our way through college with a job to be able to graduate and then get a good paying job. Our older generation had the ability to work in the same job for their entire lives and to retire with pensions and have everything taken care of for them. But the youth, believe it or not, no longer have those possibilities available to them. They can't even buy a house. Prior to 1973, a young person in America had a very good chance and a very good likelihood and even an expectation to be able to increase their wealth over time, to increase their earnings over time, and to be able to buy a house and build wealth for their family and even retire one day. But starting in 1973, that all changed as productivity continued to go up, but the hourly compensation stopped going up and has remained pretty much flat since 1973. The situation gets even worse when we look at income. Lower wage employees, especially our youth who are more likely to be in a low wage, their income has actually gone down since 1980. For the middle class, the income has barely gone up at all, only up about 6%. It's only the wealthy whose income has really increased, in a classic case of the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. And unfortunately, going to college is no longer a solution, as the wages for college grads has been falling since the year 2000 and are now barely above somebody who didn't go to college at all. To make matters worse, healthcare costs have increased since the year 2000 as employers are less and less likely to pay for healthcare. Therefore, the costs for our youth have been going up even though their wages have been staying the same. And even though the wages for college graduates has been going down for the last 25 years, the price of college has increased almost 8 times faster than wages have gone up. The total cost of college tuition since the year 1980 has absolutely skyrocketed. It has gone up by more than double since 1980, while wages since 1980 have stayed pretty much flat. Many baby boomers and Gen Xers remember working their way through college and graduating with little to no debt. Sadly, that feat is virtually impossible for the current crop of students and recent graduates. The cost of education, the cost of healthcare, the cost of buying a home have skyrocketed over the last 25 years, while wages have stayed pretty much flat. This means that for the first time in history, youth in America have almost no chance to prosper and build wealth. For the first time in history, a 30-year-old in America today is doing worse off than a 30-year-old from our generation. This goes against everything we've ever been taught. We've always believed as a nation that over time we should be doing better in society, that over time we should be building wealth, that over time our youth, our children would have a better life than we had. But for the first time in history, our children are worse off than we were when we were their age. And this has understandably created a large amount of rage and anger among our youth in America today. And this rage, anger, depression, it's all coming out. And we see this both from the left, from the Black Lives Matters protests that we saw in 2020, and we see it from the right as well, from the J6 protests. Regardless of political affiliation, regardless of conservative or liberal beliefs, youths across the nation collectively are envious of the older generation. They're envious of the older generation's ability to create wealth and to build long-last wealth and retirement, to be able to buy homes and go to college with no debt. And they're understandably angry. And this is what has led to so many riots and protests throughout the nation. It's coming out in other ways. It's coming out in social justice changes and anger against politicians, but it's all rooted in this hopelessness that our youth currently feel. Opportunities to prosper and build wealth simply aren't there like they were before. Given the way productivity has increased since 1968, if we were to have increased the minimum wage based upon the increase in productivity or inflation, the minimum wage today would be $18.42 per hour, not the $7.25 that it's currently at. The average hourly wage of a young person starting out in a low-paying job today is $10.89, which, although it is slightly higher than it was in 1968, compared to the rate of inflation, it is half of what it was in 1968. That means that almost all of our youth has been completely priced out of the housing market. The housing market, buying your first home, has historically been the number one way to build wealth in America. More wealth, more millionaires have been generated from real estate than from any other asset class. And yet today, our youth have no hope of ever being able to buy their first home. If you look at the home price to median household income, it is the highest it has ever been in the history of the United States. Housing is even more unaffordable, more out of reach for Americans than it was at the height of the great financial crisis in 2008. And with the rise in housing prices and the rise in the value of stocks, this has made it nearly impossible for young people to start building wealth. They've been completely priced out of the market. And this is why young people are less wealthy than they were when we were growing up, and they have far less chance to actually become prosperous. The great transfer of wealth has been occurring for the last 30 years. If we look at the distribution of household wealth in the US since 1989, look at the bottom on the green, and you will see that in 1990, a much larger portion of those under the age of 40 were wealthy compared to where they are today. The amount of wealth for those under 40 has significantly declined since 1990, while the amount of wealth for those over the age of 70 has significantly increased since 1990. This is the greatest transfer of wealth we have ever seen in the history of our nation, where money is being stolen from young people and transferred to the older generations. For young people, their wealth has been cut in half, while the wealth for those over the age of 70 has gone up by 50%. And no, this is not an accident. It's purposeful. It was designed this way. It's being done on purpose. Let me show you what is happening and why. Let's start with the rising cost of colleges. If we look at Ivy League admission statistics for the class of 2007, we can see that depending upon the college, anywhere from 10 to 30% of applicants were accepted into the college. Yet, if we look 20 years later at the class of 2026, the overall acceptance rate has dropped to between 3 and 6%. The total number of students being allowed to enroll in Ivy League colleges has not increased at all in the past 20 years. This is despite the number of people going to college increasing by more than 3 times over the past 20 years. And that is why the admission rates have gone down so much. So why haven't the enrollments in Ivy League colleges gone up in the past 20 years? Perhaps it's because they aren't making as much money. But actually, if we look at their endowments, we find that's simply not the case. In the past 25 years, the endowment at Brown University has gone up by 209%. The endowment at Yale has also gone up by 209%, while the endowment at the University of Pennsylvania has gone up by 364%. And while the endowments at these colleges go up by 200 to 300%, while the number of students attending these colleges stays the same, this means that the cost of education at these colleges has absolutely skyrocketed. And this is causing major problems for our youth because it's causing the amount of college debt to absolutely skyrocket even as their earning potential goes down. Colleges are supposed to be an opportunity for our youth to advance in society. It's supposed to give the underprivileged, those who don't have a fighting chance, the ability to actually increase in society, to go from poor to middle class or middle class to wealthy. Yet, colleges today are no longer interested in educating our kids. They're only interested in profits. And so long as colleges solely focus on profits instead of education, this means that fewer and fewer people have the chance to go to college and better their lives. And it also means that the education that students get while in college becomes less and less valuable when they graduate, which in turn means their wages after they graduate start to go down. To make matters worse, professors are pushing one-sided political agendas in their classes rather than teaching our youth how to be creative and critical thinkers, the kind of people who would be successful in society and would help create the next generation of technology and products and new ideas, instead of students coming out of college with a wide variety of new and fascinating ideas. They're coming out of college as people who all think the exact same way. And this is really going to hurt the future of innovation and growth in the United States of America. Until colleges break out of the cycle of focusing solely on profits, we are never going to have the ability for our youth to prosper and build wealth in America. And it's not just college universities that are hurting our youth. Old people and those in government are also hurting our youth by pricing them out of the housing market. Regulations have increased significantly, building permits are getting harder to come by, and zoning for residential areas has become less and less available. What all of this means is that the price to build a house has increased significantly, while the quality of those houses has not gone up at all. Unfortunately, home builders either have to decrease the quality of the house in order to get the house price to be the same as it was before, or they have to increase the price of the home that they're building. And this makes starter homes for first-time home buyers, such as our youth, nearly impossible. Today, a starter home is around the same price as a high-end to middle home was for us back in the year 2008. And especially with increasing interest rates, the way those have been going up, it has really priced our youth and out of the market and made it nearly impossible for them to ever be able to buy their first home. If we look at the change in student debt balance versus income since 2009, you will see that the average student debt load has absolutely skyrocketed, while the amount of income has gone up barely at all. With students' student loan debt to income ratio so much higher than it was before, this makes it very difficult for them to get approved to buy a house. It makes it very difficult for them to get approved to get a mortgage because their income just isn't high enough to be able to afford those mortgage payments. Unfortunately, we don't just see greed among college universities and the housing market. We also see a tremendous amount of greed in corporate profits as well. If you look at the compensation of employees, their wages, and total salaries compared to corporate profits, they were pretty much in line for most of American history, at least through the year 2000. Now, during 2000 up until about 2008, we did see corporate profits skyrocket, but we allowed the market to correct. We allowed the 2008 great financial crisis to occur, and we allowed those corporate profits to come back down. But starting in 2008, we stopped doing that. We had a focus solely on increasing corporate profits and the stock market. And as a result, ever since the year 2008, corporate profits have skyrocketed while wages simply have not kept up. And outside of real estate, most older Americans have their wealth in the stock market. And if we look at what has happened to the stock market compared to the wages of our youth, it is absolutely staggering. Prior to 1984, the S&P 500 pretty much kept up with the average income in the United States. Now, it did start to skyrocket in the late 90s, but we allowed the market to correct in 2001 and 2002. The S&P 500 went up again through about 2007. Again, we allowed the market to correct in 2008, bringing the stock market back fairly close to where U.S. income was at the time. However, since 2008, we have done quantitative easing, essentially allowing the S&P 500 and corporate profits to absolutely skyrocket out of control, while U.S. income has barely gone up at all. What this means is that the older generation who has a lot of their wealth tied up in the stock market has become richer and richer and richer since 2008, while our youth, who mainly focus on their income and are barely able to save anything at all, have barely seen an increase in their lifestyle whatsoever since 2008. There are a lot of reasons why the stock market has gone up so much since 2008, while U.S. income has barely gone up at all. And a lot of this has to do with our taxes, as well as the interest rate that we've had since pretty much 2009. The tax code has been written in such a way so that corporate profit taxes have been significantly coming down as corporate Capital gains have been significantly coming down as well. Meaning, if you're a business owner and you have corporate profits, or you're an individual investor and you're investing in the stock market, having capital gains, the amount of taxes that you are paying on that income has gone down significantly since 2008, while the tax rate for those who are employed, mainly our youth, has actually stayed the same, if not gone up. What that means is it's been a great time to own assets and a terrible time to be an employee. Unfortunately, if our youth is going to build wealth and get out of that employee status and eventually retire one day or even start their own business, they need money to buy assets. Unfortunately, asset prices have gone up so much in both the housing market and the stock market that the youth can no longer afford to buy assets. And as a result, they can no longer build wealth. They have no chance to prosper and build wealth like anybody did prior to 2008. Meaning, if you were working and building wealth prior to 2008, you're set, you're good to go. But anybody who entered the job market from 2008 onward has been completely unable to build wealth. And the transfer of wealth from our youth to our older generation gets even worse when we look at Social Security. In 2023, 21% of the federal budget, or $1.4 trillion, will be paid for Social Security, which will provide monthly retirement benefits averaging $1,836 to 48.6 million retired workers. Where is that $1.4 trillion coming from to pay Social Security? Well, Social Security gets funded by people who are currently working. As of April 2024, there were 133.35 million full-time employees in the United States. Now, if we take the $1.4 trillion that is being spent in Social Security for our older generation currently, and we divide that by the number of full-time workers, the amount of money that each full-time worker is paying to fund our older generation's retirement is absolutely staggering. Full-time employees are paying on average $10,500 per year, or $875 per month, to fund the Social Security for our older generation. Every year, we transfer $1.4 trillion from our youth who are doing worse and worse off and could really use that extra $875 per month. And we transfer it to an older generation who is retired. 80% of the older generation has built so much wealth in the housing market and stock market, they do not need to pull Social Security. If we changed Social Security retirements to make it so that it was income-based rather than age-based, we could eliminate 80% of our Social Security benefits to seniors. The fact is, 80% of seniors do not need to pull Social Security. They make more than enough money from their retirement, more than enough money from the stock market, and more than enough money from their bonds and their housing and other investments to be able to live very, very comfortably, way better than our youth could ever hope to live. And there is absolutely no reason for every single person over a certain age to be pulling Social Security. Social Security needs to be income-based, not age-based. Just that one change alone could reduce Social Security by 80% and reduce the amount of money that young Americans are paying into Social Security from $875 a month down to $200 per month. It would be one of the greatest helps to young Americans today. Now, why is it the case that Social Security benefits are still being paid out to every single person over the age of 65? Well, it all has to do with who votes. The fact of the matter is, our politicians, those in Congress and those in the Senate, they are representatives. And who do they represent? They represent their voters. And by and large, voters are older. Young people in America, by and large, just don't vote. So when it comes to solutions, the first thing I got to say is, as a young person, go vote. The average age of a politician in the United States has gone up significantly over the past few years and continues to do so. The average age of our congressmen and senators has skyrocketed since 1980. The average age of a congressman today is 59 years old, while the average age of a senator is 64 years old. What can somebody born in the 1960s or 1950s possibly know about a young person who's struggling to pay their college tuition when college tuition is more than 10 times higher than it was when the politicians currently in Congress went to college? What can they possibly know about youth's struggle to buy housing when houses are more than 8 times more unaffordable than they were when our politicians were in their 30s? There's simply a huge disconnect there, and it's not possible for our politicians to know and understand all of the technology and the changes that young people are going through today. And as the age of our politicians continues to go higher and higher, this problem is only going to get worse and worse. This is why we desperately need term limits in Congress so that we can get representatives who more accurately represent the average age of our population in the United States, and who no longer represent only the older generation. But so long as old politicians remain in office, and so long as they disproportionately represent the older generation in America, the transfer of wealth from our youth to the older generation will continue. Unfortunately, politicians, in their thievery, used the COVID pandemic to speed up the transfer of wealth from the young to the old. If we look at a chart of the NASDAQ from 1999 to 2009, you can see how it stayed pretty much flat for more than 10 years. Yes, we had a big spike in the year 2000, but we allowed the market to correct. We allowed the S&P 500 to fall by 50% in 2001 and 2002. And we allowed the NASDAQ to fall by 80% in 2001 and 2002. And when the stock market went up and got overvalued in 2008, once again, we allowed the market to correct. These corrections in the stock market allow a rebalancing. They allow corporate profits to get back in line with stock prices. They lower valuations for stocks, and they allow our younger generation to buy stocks at fair prices rather than the extremely elevated valuations that stock prices are at today. Unfortunately, our politicians used both the 2008 great financial crisis as well as the COVID pandemic to absolutely destroy young people's lives and to make it impossible for them to afford assets at reasonable valuations. Politicians pumped huge amounts of money into the economy starting in the year 2008 and especially in the year 2020. And with no other place for that money to go, it all went into the stock market. The stock market chart from the year 2008 to today looks very different from the stock market chart from 1999 to 2009. It has been a straight ride upward as the government spends more and more and more money, as the Congress just prints and prints and prints money, and the older generation who already owns stocks gets wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, while the younger generation continues to get priced out of the market and have less and less hope of ever building wealth. This had the effect of causing the greatest theft from young people in the history of the United States. All of the money that the government printed from the year 2008 to present, that showed up in the form of government debt. And who is going to have to deal with that government debt? It's going to be our children. It's going to be the young people in America. And while the older generation has benefited from all of this printing of money by being able to increase their wealth, our youth have completely missed out. And instead of being able to build wealth themselves, they now have to pay off the debt that we used to build wealth for ourselves. This is theft in its greatest form. We're stealing from our future generations in order to build wealth for ourselves. Congress, our politicians and Senate, they did it. They are the ones that did this to us, and we went right along with it. Valuations today are higher than they were in 1929 before the Great Depression. They are higher than they were in 1987 before the greatest stock market crash in history. They aren't quite as high as they were in 2001, but again, in 2001 and 2008, when valuations skyrocketed, we allowed the market to correct. 2011 was the last time that anybody in America had the ability to buy stocks at fair valuations. Since the year 2011, stock prices have never fallen below a PE ratio of 19. In other words, since 2011, stock prices have never corrected back down to low valuations where young people would be able to buy stocks and build wealth for the future. Any young American who's buying a stock today is buying it at an elevated price, and there is a very high chance that stock prices are going to go down in the future rather than up. In 2001 and 2002, stock prices fell by 50% in the S&P 500 and 80% in the NASDAQ. It was a great rebalancing that allowed people like Warren Buffett to buy stocks at very low prices. But any youth who has entered the job market since 2011 or later has been completely unable to build wealth. Unfortunately, today, with the way stock prices are valued, the likelihood of another 50% drop in the stock market is very high. Unfortunately, a 50% drop in the stock market would completely decimate a young person's portfolio and make it nearly impossible for them to ever hope of having any chance at retirement. To make matters worse, with the older generation mainly investing in dividend stocks and bonds, a 50% drop in the stock market would barely affect their income at all, meaning a drop in the stock market would disproportionately hurt young people while barely having any impact at all on the older generation. And this is just another way in which the youth in America, their future is being robbed by the older generation. It's not necessarily our fault. It's mainly the fault of politicians, but there are some things that we can do to fix it. If we look at the amount of total public debt, it was barely rising at a slow, steady pace up until the year 2008. But since 2008, the amount of public debt has absolutely skyrocketed. This is all due to tremendous printing of money by the government, and all of that printing of money has created the largest deficit in the federal budget in the history of the United States. And unfortunately, the deficit is not getting better. The government continues to spend money they don't have. They continue to print money and prop up the stock market, and our youth are going to pay the price. With no hope for our youth to build wealth in the future, this has led to the highest rates of depression and suicide in the history of the United States. Youth suicide rates rose 62% from 2007 to 2021 as people feel hopeless. While the youth homicide rate has barely increased, the youth suicide rate has significantly increased since 2007. The percent of teens ages 12 to 17 who have had at least one major depressive episode in the past year has gone up tremendously since 2007. And while depression has always been higher among girls, the increase among girls was significantly higher than it was among boys. This is largely due to the fact that the wage growth for men has gone up much higher than the wage growth for women. Women have been disproportionately hurt by the decrease in wages over the past 15 years. And that is why the rate of depression among our youth has increased more among women than it has among men. To put this all into perspective, if we look at a ranking of happiness among the old, those ages 60 and above, the World Happiness Report, that was a study done between 2021 and 2023, found that the older generation in America ranks the 10th happiest in the world. But if we look at the ranking of happiness for the young, that is anybody under the age of 30 in the United States of America, we don't even rank in the top 25. Youth in America are the 62nd happiest in the world, ranking near the bottom of the free world. So that's the situation report. Now, the good news is we have a solution. We can fix this. We have the money to fix this. Now, the solution depends upon how old you are. Let me talk about different solutions depending upon your age group. If you're young, if you're under the age of 30, then there are two things you need to do. Number one, you need to vote. You need to get out to the polls. You need to vote. You need to vote in younger politicians who understand your needs and will be able to help push for policies that can help you instead of constantly pushing policies that only help the older generation in America. The second thing that you need to do as a young person is to be extremely frugal and to invest anything you can into the stock market. Even though valuations are currently quite high, and even though the stock market will most likely come down at some point, as you continue to invest into the stock market, you're going to start to build wealth there. And that wealth that you build will eventually be able to be used to buy stocks at very low valuations once we do get an eventual correction in the market. And if politicians continue to pump money into the market and the market never corrects, at least you will be able to ride the bandwagon and ride the wave up as stock prices go up, just like the older generation is able to do. You have to find a way to start building wealth. You can't let the problems in society cause you to get depressed and not build wealth. You just have to go out there and do it. Now, I understand that a lot of young people don't know how to invest in the stock market, and that's why I created a course to teach you how to do it. If you want to build wealth, you want to get out of this cycle of poverty that so many of our youth have entered into, and you want to change, you want to move up in society, you want to learn how to open a brokerage account and start investing in stocks, I encourage you to go take my course. I have it at a very, very low price. It's only a few $100s. It's not the thousands of dollars that a lot of people charge. And I put it at that low price so that you could afford it, because I know that young people don't have a lot of money. So I kept the price very, very low to help you out, to help you afford it so that you can learn how to build wealth for you and your future family. To take that course, just go to weprofit.io/courses. And you will find the Fast Track to Trading Success course there, weprofit.io/courses. Go sign up for the Fast Track to Trading Success course and start building wealth for you now. Now, for the older generation, there are a lot of things that we can do to help out our youth, but it's going to require that all of us as a society learn to become less greedy and to take some of that wealth that we've acquired over the last 25 years and to give it back to our youth. This means increasing wages and lowering profits for corporations. It especially means increasing wages among the lowest income earners, such as those making minimum wage. It means increasing taxes on corporations and the wealthiest Americans and lowering taxes for the lowest income earners, possibly even creating a negative income tax for the poorest Americans. We need to reform Social Security, eliminate benefits for everyone over a certain age, and instead provide benefits only to those seniors who need it the most. We need to increase college enrollment and vocational programs and put a cap on public university profits. We need to vote in younger politicians who understand the struggles of our youth and who understand how technology affects our lives. Simply put, we need term limits in Congress and the Senate. We can do all of this. We have the means to do it, but do we have the will? In order for these changes to take place, we as Americans have to start caring about our children. We have to be willing to give up some of our wealth in order to give our youth a fighting chance. I have heard so many baby boomers and the older generation say that they plan to spend all of their money, that they plan to enjoy retirement, that they plan to leave nothing for their kids. If we can change that mindset and actually start helping our youth, we can help them have the same kind of level of prosperity that we enjoyed when we were their age. We can do this with our own children, even if we don't expect politicians to change, and they probably won't. We as individuals can do something for our kids. If we have the means, we can pay off their student loan debt. We can free them from that burden and give them the chance to be able to build wealth without having a lifetime of debts. We can provide a down payment for their first house, or we can create college education funds for our grandchildren because we know that our children probably don't have the money to be able to afford to have their children go to college for free like we were able to. For those millennials and others who have young children who are not yet in college, we need to immediately do something to give them a fighting chance. If we don't start saving for their college right now, they are going to graduate with a mountain of debt that they will most likely never pay off in their lifetime. And they're going to graduate college with a lower wage than we had when we graduated from college, adjusted for inflation. We need to immediately open college savings funds for our kids. Sometimes we can open youth investing accounts if we're not sure if our kids are going to go to college or not. In most countries throughout the world, these savings plans are tax-free. Here in the United States, there are a number of different types of college savings funds or youth investment funds that we as parents can open for our kids. I personally have these funds at Fidelity. I have one fund for each of my kids. I'm trying to save some money and fund their college education. I am trying to give them a fighting chance so that they can graduate from college debt-free, just like I was able to do, since we know that getting a job is no longer enough to be able to afford college and graduate without a mountain of student loan debt. Now, if your kids are older, if they've already graduated from college, you can help them out tremendously. Right now, almost all of our youth is completely priced out of the housing market. Yet, with an FHA loan, you can buy your first house with just a 3.5% down payment. And that down payment can be a gift. As parents and grandparents, we have the ability to give a 3.5% down payment as a gift to our children or grandchildren to help them buy their first house. As I said earlier, buying a home is the single greatest builder of wealth in the United States of America, and yet our youth have no chance of ever being able to buy their first home because home affordability is the lowest it has ever been in the history of the United States. Simple fact is, almost nobody under the age of 30 can buy a home. And for many, they have no hope of ever being able to buy a home. But we can change that. We can help them. We can gift them that 3.5% down payment so that they can go buy their first home and be able to build wealth for themselves and their children as well. Of course, if we have grandchildren, we can also open those college savings accounts for our grandchildren. It doesn't just have to be our kids. And in addition, if we have the means, we can help out our children or our grandchildren by paying off their student loan debt. Now, is this going to hurt us financially? Is this going to reduce the amount of money that we have in the stock market? Is this going to reduce our income in our retirement years? Yes, it will. But we have to understand that our youth are hurting. They need our help. We have to be givers. We can't be greedy. We have to be willing to give up some of our help to help our children. The fact is, they need us.